you're able. So this is the word of the Lord. Sometime later, the cupbearer, wine steward we'd say today, the sommelier or whatever, and the baker of the king of Egypt offended their master, a little more than offended. The king of Egypt. And Pharaoh was angry with his two officials, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker, and he put them in the custody in the house of the captain of the guard in the same prison where Joseph was confined. And the captain of the guard assigned them to Joseph, and he attended them. He was their slave. And after they had been in custody for some time, each of the two men, the cupbearer and the baker of the king of Egypt, who were together being held in prison, had a dream the same night. And each dream had a meaning of its own. One was good and one was not. When Joseph came to them the next morning, he saw that they were dejected, and so he asked Pharaoh's officials who were in custody with him in his master's house, "Why do you look so sad today?" "We both had dreams," they answered, "but there's no one to interpret them." And now here it is. Then Joseph said to them, "Do not interpretations belong to God? Tell me your dreams." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. You can be seated now. So I don't know how you know the story of Joseph. Do you know the story of Joseph? I mean, it's a great story. It's a story that people love to tell. It occupies a huge section of the book of Genesis, starts in chapter 37 and runs all the way through the end of the book, which is chapter 50. And maybe you know it from the scriptures, or maybe you know it from Andrew Lloyd Webber, Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. You ever seen that? It's great. And if you don't know it from Andrew Lloyd Webber, you might know it from VeggieTales. The Ballad of Little Joe. I thought about just playing a bit of VeggieTales this morning, but I thought maybe there's some copyright issues, so I didn't do it. But it's a telling of the story. Although when Andrew Lloyd Webber or VeggieTales tells the story of Joseph, they always kind of clean it up a little bit, right? It's harder than that. Starts with family. This great rollicking family, all those kids, 11 brothers at the time, later 12, and sisters. We only know about one, but there must have been more. This great rollicking family. It's the kind of family that I grew up in. When I grew up, my mother's family, there were 9 in her family. So not counting my mother and my dad, I had 16 uncles and aunts just on that side alone. And then some of my father's family got involved with my mother's family, and so there were more. And we would, every Sunday after church, everybody would go to my grandma's house. It was kind of a little shotgun house. And all the men would sit in the front room, and all the women would sit in the kitchen, and the 30 or 40 cousins would be running all over the neighborhood, terrorizing the neighborhood. That was, you didn't want to be around the Vanderpool house after church. And on holidays were special. We would all go to, on 4th of July or whatever, we'd all go to my grandma's house in the morning, and then there would be this big confab about where to go that day. And, some people would say, let's go to Woodland Park, which is in Seattle, and some people would say, let's go to Stanley Park, which is in Vancouver, and some people would say, let's go to Mount Baker. We had all these old cars, and they almost never made it entirely there. And then finally they decide, so they're going to go to Stanley Park, whatever. And my dad would always get lost going to Stanley Park. And everybody would pile into the cars. And if you were one of the cousins, you didn't pile into your parents' car. You piled into somebody else's car. And there we would go, this caravan of like 10 cars going north to Vancouver. They loved each other. They played together. They laughed together. They sang together. As a matter of fact, I was thinking about the banjo, Jimmy and the banjo this morning. They would gather in my grandma's front room and play instruments together, country western style, and so that was great this morning for me. But they also fought. And sometimes the fights were so bitter that the family could hardly stay together. In fact, in some ways, it didn't stay together. That's Jacob's family. And it started with the dreams, you know. Well, it started with the favoritism and with the coat of many colors, whatever that coat was. It's a little hard to figure out what the Hebrew is saying there, but that coat that nobody else had, that was given by Jacob to Joseph, the Technicolor dream coat, as Andrew Lloyd Webber has it, and then the dreams, and the dreams are transparent. You know, there's the sheaves of grain, you know, the bundles of grain, and all the bundles of the brothers bow down to Joseph. And then there's the sun, moon, and the stars. I kind of like this one. And the sun, moon, and the sun and the moon are Jacob's father and mother, and then all the stars, his brothers, and they all bow down to him. And I kept thinking, why would he tell the dream? I mean, even if it's true, if he knows it's going to come, if the Lord's in the dream, and he must have known that, then why would he tell his brothers? Because he knew what it would do to his brothers to tell the dream. But I think he's young. He's 17 years old. And it's a burden. He knows that in some way his parents and his brothers are going to bow down to him, but in the bowing down, is that a good thing or a bad thing? What's going to occasion it? What's going to happen? What's going to lead to it? He's confused. He bears the burden of the future. But the brothers, they know what the dream means. They think they know. They think it's a sign of Joseph's arrogance. They think it's a sign that Joseph has ambitions that he shouldn't have. And so because of that, they are angry at him. And what happens when you think the dream is the wrong dream? What do? You kill the dreamer. Right? This is a pattern in the Bible. You know that long litany about the prophets, the good people in Hebrews 11, you know, these people of faith that all die because somebody wants to kill the dream. Or Jesus himself, who announces the dream in a whole new way in his time. And what do people try to do? What does the Roman Empire try to do? They want to kill the dream, so they kill the dreamer. You can do with that whatever you want to do. We still do it today. If we want to kill the dream, we try to kill the dreamer. And so Joseph goes out to the field, and when he goes out to the field to bring them lunch, whatever, they first decide to kill him. And then when the slave traders come by, they see a convenient way not to have to kill him. And so they put him on the slave train going to Egypt. And as he's leaving, they take his Technicolor dream coat and they dip it into the blood of a sheep. And they bring it to Jacob and they say, the dream is dead. And Joseph goes off. And next we meet him in Potiphar's house, and the whole thing starts over again, and he rises up, and he is beloved, and the wife of Potiphar takes a shine to him, and he refuses her, and so she falsely accuses him, and he ends up in jail. And that's where we meet him in the story. And it's in jail when it looks like the dream is dead, nothing will ever happen, he's going to rot there, that come those dreams from from the baker and the wine steward. And they come to him and he says, this is what he's learned. Interpretation is from God. It is God who interprets. Does not interpretation belong to God? That's the question this morning. That's the text this morning. Because we're always trying to figure it out, right? We're trying to figure out our lives. We're trying to figure out what it is that's going on in the world. And so we're doing that with our own lives, and we have a dream, perhaps for our own sake, and we think this is what we're going to do with our lives. You know, we're going to go to college here, or we're going to have this kind of a job, or we're going to marry this person, or we're going to take retirement, and we're going to spend a great time doing whatever it is that you're at, you know, whatever it is your dream is, and then suddenly reality comes kind of pressing in. And you get the diagnosis that you didn't want, or the relationship that you wanted breaks up, doesn't stick. Or you get involved in something that you shouldn't be involved in, or whatever, your life gets consumed, and you think in the bottom of your pit that the dream is dead. But Joseph knows that interpretation belongs to God. This is at the lowest point. I mean, he tells the wine steward, because the wine steward is the one who gets released, he tells the wine steward, go to the Pharaoh and tell him my story. And it says, this is the last verse of chapter 40, the wine steward forgot Joseph. It's not going anywhere. And then the Pharaoh dreams a dream. And they're looking for someone to make sense of the dream. And the wine steward remembers Joseph. And they go to the prison, and they find him. And he becomes the ruler of the second in command, the ruler of Egypt, and his brothers who had thought that they had killed him or at least sent him off into slavery come to get the provisions, because they are now starving and desperate, and he plays them like a cat with a mouse until finally he weeps and he reveals himself, and suddenly they realize that this is the dream. It's Romans 8, you know. What do we say in response to these things? If God is for us, who can be against us? And we know that in all things, God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. The dream will not die because God will not let it die, right? All right. And that's the truth in the Joseph story, and that's the truth in your own story. God will not let you go. God has a dream for you, and God's dream will not fall down, because God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. But then, right in the middle of that great story, that story that we all love, that story that, you know, they're being made musicals and Veggie Tales and everything about because it's such a wonderful story, in the middle of it, the Bible drops another story. Do you know this? I mean, read it. You know, you start in chapter 37, you read the story of Joseph, and then all of a sudden you get to chapter 38, and it's a different story. It's like the editors of the Old Testament pried apart the Joseph story and stuck this other story that had nothing to do with it right in the middle. It's the story of Tamar. You know Tamar? Now, I'm going to have to be a little delicate here, okay? Because you can't tell the Tamar story is a little harder to tell in church than the Joseph story. So Tamar is the daughter-in-law of Judah, who is the older brother of Joseph, and and eventually the ancestor of David, as you probably know. But Tamar is married to Judah's oldest son, whose name is It's an ayin in Hebrew, and an ayin in Hebrew is kind of okay? So it's And you know that anybody that's named isn't going to meet a good end, right? I mean, if it's a hero, you give him the name like, I don't know, Vince or Clint or something, you know? But if he's the villain, you give him the story of the name of So Tamar and get married, and dies because he displeased the Lord. I should tell you that. And he dies, and so now they have this strange custom called Levirate marriage, in which if one of the family dies and there's no heirs, there's no children, then it's the responsibility of the brothers, one of the brothers, the next one, to be with the wife of the former, the son who died, and raise up children, but they're not children for they're children for the person who died, and he's the oldest heir, and because he's the oldest, he gets a double share, and so nobody wants to raise up children for him, because if you raise up children for him, then your own children are going to get less, right? So there's this man named Onan, next one down, and he, how do I put this delicately, he exercises a kind of primitive form of birth control so that Tamar does not have children. And he dies. And now Judah is thinking to himself, it's Tamar. It's Tamar. Tamar is the one who is the problem here. And he has another son, and he says, I'm not going to let her anywhere as close to this son, because if she comes anywhere as close to this son, he's going to die, and I'm going to be without children entirely. And so he just says, why don't you just live in my house, and you can just be a widow, but no children, right? And then Tamar dresses up. Well, Judah goes for a journey, and Tamar dresses up like a prostitute. She knows something about her father-in-law, not flattering. And she waits, and when Judah sees her, he comes into her tent. And he doesn't have any money, so he leaves her his seal. His seal is his signature. It is a very powerful thing, and his staff. And he goes off back home. And then a bit later, he hears that Tamar has gotten pregnant. And when Tamar gets pregnant, he's angry. He goes storming down there. He's gonna have her killed for committing adultery. And about the time that he says that, she takes out his seal and his staff, and it all starts to dawn on him. Why, in the middle of this grand story of Joseph, do we put a story of Tamar? Because of this. This is the beginning of the book of Matthew, the beginning of the New Testament, first verse of the New Testament, a record of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. And Abraham was the father of Isaac, and Isaac was the father of Jacob, and Jacob was the father of Judah and his brothers. And Judah was the father of Perez and Zerah, whose mother was Tamar. The Joseph story isn't the crucial story. It's not the story of grace. It's the story of support. Joseph exists to make sure that Tamar has something to eat. Because the line of the Messiah doesn't go through Joseph. It goes through Tamar. And I think this is the reason why why the Bible tells the story this way. It wants to say to us, we always are taken by grand things, and Joseph is a grand thing. Joseph is the one who becomes the second in command of all Egypt. It's a great story. It's a story of individual triumph against all odds because God is in his story. We know we can go on and on about the Joseph story, but the real story is Tamar's story. It's the little people. It's the ones who are forgotten and lost. It's the ones who are desperate. I mean, what she does is an absolute act of desperation. Who have the line of the Messiah. Jesus comes through Tamar. And so that's what I want to leave with you today. In telling your story. And asking the question, what is the core truth of your story? The core truth of your story may not be those great things that you achieve. The core truth of Crosspoint Church may not be the big building or the high cross or anything else. Maybe the core truth of our stories is that somewheres along the line, like Joseph, we made it possible for Tamar to exist. That person that no one noticed. That person who was like Mary and other people. That person who was small. That person who was forgotten. That person that even today is forgotten. God is a God of Joseph. He's our God. He's in your story. But God is telling a story which is so filled with grace, so surprising, so beautiful, that the hero of the story is not Joseph, but Tamar and Jesus. And maybe the person sitting right next to you. Pray with me, will you? Lord God, we know that you tell the story in a way that none of us expect. And that in telling the story, we are constantly surprised. And that just when we think we've got it all figured out, you remind us that maybe we didn't see it at all. Give us the humility to see in the story that you are telling the unexpected, the grace, the Tamars. In the name of Jesus, amen.